Well, good afternoon and welcome. I am Megan Maloney. I am our Chief Academic Officer at American Reading Company, and I want to welcome and thank you for participating in our Voices from the Field, Making Equitable Systems a Reality webinar today. This is our third webinar series around Voices from the Field. We started in the beginning of the year hearing from our curriculum and teaching and learning directors. Then we moved from hearing from voices from our principals and assistant principals. And today we are going to have an exciting conversation with 6 ARC Core superintendents. And you can see who they are on the screen. We have Dr. Davis, Dr. Kaiser, Dr. Morcio, Dr. Smith, Dr. Spells, and Dr. Downing Toledo. They will all introduce themselves in a little bit. But we also are joined today with Dr. Irvin Scott and Dr. Pedro Noguera. Irvin Scott is currently working with the Harvard Graduate Studies School of Education. He has worked in many districts across the country, as well as he's worked for the Gates Foundation. So we welcome Dr. Scott. We also are welcoming today Dr. Pedro Noguera. He is currently at the Rozier School of Education in California, and he has been a distinguished professor at the University of Southern California. Dr. Noguera has started his work as a teacher in Providence and in New York. So welcome to our panelists and facilitators today, and we will start with hearing from our superintendents. Dr. Davis.
Good afternoon, everybody. So glad to be here. Thank you for having me. My name is Christina Davis, and I am the superintendent in West Chicago Elementary District 33, a district southwest of the city of Chicago, about 20-30 miles. We are a small suburban school, well, small relative to I think the panelists or people that are attending this. We're about 4,000 students. That's pretty big, actually, in Illinois, but I know small in comparison to a lot of these Texans here. But we are 82% Hispanic. We are 74% low income. We are approximately 64% English learners. And I always say 100% amazing because it's a great community. We're surrounded by some of the most affluent and highly resourced districts in the state of Illinois. So that's something unique for us. This is my 14th year in West Chicago, going on my third year as superintendent. I started with this pandemic, so I'm extremely excited to finally feel like we're getting back to the business of education and not managing a pandemic.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Mauricio. I am the proud son of a Dominican and Puerto Rican parents who immigrated to New York City and born and raised there and spent 25 years in the city of Buffalo. And so obviously a relevant, unfortunate space right now for us to think. And my heart is certainly with all my friends and family and that community, which I actually lived in for 10 years. And I am a 4-year, like Dr. Davis, I'm a 4-year superintendent, which in some ways means I've been doing this for 20 years, if you think about the pandemic and how fast it's gone. But it also means that after my first year, I kind of stalled some of my leadership and then got really good at making decisions after Friday changes of pandemic rules from CDC and other places. But like Dr. Davis and everyone here, it's an honor for me to be here with you. I'm a superintendent in Peekskill, New York, which is about 45 minutes outside of New York City. It's a wonderful, diverse community on the majestic and historic Hudson River. And we have about 73% of our students are Latino, about 18% of our students are African-American, and we also have about 75% poverty rate. But all in all, we talk about Peekskill pride. And so in all that we do, our children are amazing and our families are connected, and our teachers and staff are committed to the promise that we have for our children. So again, an honor to be here.
Thank you. Dr. Kaiser.
Good afternoon. My name is Dan Kieser. I'm the superintendent in the school district of Beloit in Beloit, Wisconsin, which is located center midway east-west, but 5 miles north of the Illinois border, so south central Wisconsin. I'm completing my second year here in the school district. So I too started in the middle of a pandemic, and so I feel like it's been 10 years for every year that we've had. But I'm completing my 24th year in education. Like my colleagues, a small but mighty diverse district. We're about a third white, a third Black, and a third Hispanic Latinx, 74% free and reduced lunch. In our first year of implementing with American Reading Company, and excited that we're talking about increasing student agency and the steps that we're taking to do that.
Thank you. Dr. Smith.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Michelle Smith. I am the superintendent of Berwyn North School District. Berwyn North is about 10 miles west of the city of Chicago. A little bit about Berwyn. I describe us as the district where all things are possible. We have about 3 elementary schools, 1 middle school. We have 80% of our students are Latino, 17% are Black, 3% are other. And currently we have about 275 or so teachers and a district of about 2,500 students. Again, I'm very happy to be here, and I want to say good afternoon to all.
Thank you. Dr. Spells.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Ken Spells. I'm superintendent of Hazel Crest, 152 and a half. We are about 20 miles south of Chicago, Illinois. This is my 3rd superintendency. I was superintendent in Alton, Illinois, near St. Louis, and South Bend. I was superintendent in South Bend, Indiana. We are a small district, about 1,000 students. A high poverty district, and we're really working hard to improve student achievement in our district and trying to get all of our students on grade level. And we're in our first year with ARC, and we really like what we're seeing.
Thank you. And Dr. Downing Toledo.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephanie Downey Toledo. I have the great privilege of leading the Central Falls School District in Rhode Island. The fun fact about Central Falls, at one point it held the record of most densely populated city in the US. And so what that means for me is that I can walk to all of our schools, which I love. And so there are 5,000 school-age children in this square mile. It's an amazing place. Come and visit us. We have been partnering with ARC now for about 4 years. Hopefully I'll get to share more. I don't know if anyone else can relate, but it's hard to set a start point because we sort of did it in pieces. And so we're in our 2nd year of ARC Core, but had started with some of the other parts before we could fully afford it. But we're hooked now and pulling every resource we can because we're seeing the amazing transformation for our students. Our big focus with American Reading this year has been supporting our multilingual learners in their biliteracy, and doing that by partnering with families in new and innovative ways that ARC has supported us with, making really data-informed decisions. People tease me, but I often open School Pace most days before my email. And thirdly, really investing these short-term ESSER funds for long-term gains by providing as much embedded coaching for teachers, for school leaders, for district leaders, while we can, while we have these funds. So excited to share more and learn more from everyone today.
Thank you. And we are looking forward to some great conversations. Dr. Nagara.
Thank you, Megan. And thank you all for being part of this conversation. It's such a challenging time to be a superintendent. So we appreciate any time you could give for this conversation today. I'm in touch with lots of superintendents, particularly here in California. And what we're seeing is lots of people deciding to give it up, retire early, move on, because the stress of the job has become too great. And I want to talk about that. What's making the job so challenging and how you're approaching those challenges now. So as many of us know, the pandemic by itself was a huge challenge for all of us, but more so for some. As we've learned, it impacted some communities much more heavily than others, particularly those who had to work, didn't have the privilege of working from home, who had to risk their lives to work as cashiers, and essential workers who often were the lowest paid workers. They got a disproportionate amount of the COVID. They had the deaths in greater detail, and their kids, in many cases, were least likely to be present in school. One of the things we saw during the pandemic was that kids in rural areas were going to school and present, kids in urban areas largely not. So on top of dealing with the pandemic and the health issues and the economic issues it raised, now we're dealing with the learning loss, the fact that many kids are significantly behind academically. And so the fact that they might be in the 8th grade doesn't mean they can do 8th grade level work. And that poses a real challenge. How do we address where the kids are, knowing full well we've got to help them to get to where they need to be so they can graduate? And if that weren't enough, then we've got politics that have become more polarized, and in the last year or so, focused on schools. We've got states banning books. We've got states banning critical race theory. We've got states making it difficult for people who identify as gay or transgendered to express their rights and to receive an education without harassment. So I don't want to throw too much at you at once, but I know that many of you are contending with these issues. So I'd like to hear, particularly, let's start with learning loss. If if whoever feels motivated, say, look, this is what we're doing now. This is how we're approaching that challenge. And you don't all have to address every question either.
Thank you, Dr. Noguera. So in Beloit, we've been addressing the unmet teaching and learning needs by framing it as that there's always been unmet teaching and learning needs, and we need to take the opportunity to do root cause analysis. As it turned out, literacy has been our focus all the way along, and so we realized with our dual language and our monolingual programs, we had an opportunity to look at resources and start to bridge that gap so that we weren't using two curricular resources. It's how we ended up with the American Reading Company, is that now we actually have a coherent curricular resource. So now we can actually build curriculum collaboratively with two different programs. And so we are like our colleague here, I'm spending a lot of time in school PACE and really starting to see the change in our kindergarten and first grade levels, and are excited with the direction that we're heading. It also has spurred more conversations around doing instructional rounds and being in classrooms and saying, what does good instruction look like, as opposed to having that deficit mindset and trying to come up with every excuse that has nothing to do with things that we have control over.
I think Dr. Smith has her hand up.
Yeah, I sort of want to address the issue of what we frame as learning loss. I sort of like to define it as knowledge, skills, standards that were not addressed, right? So technically, kids haven't lost anything if they actually learned it, but the things that they should have gotten in the years where we were at home for the pandemic, actually, they didn't get all of what they needed for the grade level at that time. I want to frame my response a couple ways. First, I want to acknowledge our current reality in education, which Dr. Noguera, you did such a good job of that. But there's a couple other things that are facing superintendents that are causing additional stress. So educators in general are in a different place since returning from the pandemic. I don't know what my colleagues are experiencing, but what we're seeing is that educators are struggling with time in terms of working past their contractual day. They're prioritizing their lives and their families. And to be honest, that's not a bad place to be. It's just the current reality, which means some of the things that traditionally we would do for learning loss don't work right now. Because we do extended day before school programs, after school programs, summer school programs. Some of those traditional things aren't working the way they have worked in the past.
Can you explain why? Why aren't they working?
Well, teachers are in a different place. So, maybe my colleagues aren't experiencing this, but my teachers have defined it sort of as they have a different perspective on life after the pandemic. And so they don't want to stay beyond their contractual hours and continue to work with kids, especially if they have to be in masks. Right? They don't want to be there before the beginning of the school day and have to put on a mask at 7:30 in the morning when kids don't walk in the building typically until 8:25. And so I have to wear my mask because I'm in front of kids. I'm providing instruction early. And not only that, I think that, again, it's just sort of a reprioritizing that has taken place in education, which might be why we see some superintendents leaving the profession as well. But in addition to that, there aren't any additional days, any hours in a day. So what I constantly hear people say is, oh, educators need to do more. They need to do more. And I go, yeah, sort of. So here's my answer to that. I don't think the answer is more. I think the answer is different. I think we have to sort of look at it different. And so, for example, our curriculum has to change, right? And so part of it is we need curriculum that is rigorous and relevant, period. We can't use the same thing that we've always used and expect to get a different result. Things are changing by the minute, I might add. And the curriculum, the strategies that we need to change so that they promote rigor and they promote analytical thinking. So I'm going to argue that it isn't more we need, it's different that we need. We have to approach what we're doing in a different way. And I want to say, like most of the other districts on this call, we have also adopted ARC. And we use that mostly in K through 3 to provide some solid foundational skills in reading. And there's some other things that we are working on as well. But, we're trying to run a traditional summer program. But again, we've even had to rethink that because it's been hard to get people to teach. So we are rethinking it. We're sending our kids out this summer to a lot of different programs. A little bit of in-house with our teachers that we can get to work for a couple of weeks, and a lot of different programs so that they get a variety of experiences.
Thank you. And I see Dr. Mauricio.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Noguera, and thank you, Dr. Scott, and everyone on the call. So I have a bit of a unique perspective, not totally unique, but somewhat unique. I'm superintendent here. I also bought a home in the community in which I serve. And I live in one of the richest counties in America, but Peekskill is not equivalent to Westchester County. Scarsdale Public Schools and many others are wonderful communities in our community, but our community is very diverse and economically challenged, if you will. But I also wear a hat of a homeowner, as I mentioned, a community member. So when I go to the store in my, Saturday, workout gear, I'm seeing families, I'm seeing individuals who are from our community, and they're very respectful. But I also have a little girl. My little princess, Ileana, is in kindergarten in my district. She was in pre-K last year. And so she is part of this launch of ARC. And one of the things I appreciate when I'm hearing from our colleagues is that we had a choice when the pandemic began. And while it seems 10 years ago, it was a little over 2.25 years ago. And we had a choice to just lead through the pandemic. And that in itself was an awesome task. And that was a struggle for many. But we actually decided, superintendents on this call, to do more, to actually launch a literacy initiative during a pandemic when we didn't know whether we were wearing masks, whether kids were coming in, whether measuring tapes of how far they were apart, taping out zones for where teachers would be, parents wanting virtual, kids wanting to be in person, and everything else that Dr. Noguera so eloquently said. And so what we did is what a pilot does on the runway. You got to decide, are you going to lift this plane or not. There's no halfway to take flight. You're either in it or you're not. And so what we did is push the throttle down and say, yes, we are launching a new literacy series during a pandemic. And we're doing so because our kids don't have 2 years to wait. We could not see the end of the pandemic, and therefore we couldn't wait to say, we'll come back to this strategic initiative when the pandemic is over. And so I want to thank our teachers, our administrators, and my board for all that they did to say, yes, we're not sure how this is going to go, and we don't have everything in order, but we are going to move forward for our kids. And I do see, Dr. Noguera, I see the learning loss, and I've titled it many different ways, unfinished learning, et cetera. But at the end of the day, when I look at the data pre-pandemic, and I looked at the data when the pandemic began and when our kids finally got back into school fully this year, I saw the gap, and it was significant. Yeah. But what gave me solace and what gave me opportunity to move forward is we have a data system through ARC. We have leveled libraries in our classrooms. Our kids have access to thousands of books online at home and many other things that I will share, but I'm going to stop there. But I do want to say, Dr. Noguera, that is a critical thing that we can't, and I'm a positive person, optimist by nature, but we can't forget that certain communities were impacted greater, and we have to do things differently for our children. So well said, Dr. Smith.
Thank you. Thank you. And in a second, I see Dr. Christina Davis is ready, but maybe you could also talk about the teacher burnout, because what we're hearing about is the great retirement. Lots of teachers saying, I'm done, I'm gonna leave. And I don't know if that's impacting your districts in terms of teacher shortages. So Dr. Davis?
Yes, definitely. I was gonna hit on that because we were in a similar situation prior to the pandemic. We had just launched our core and we were pre-K through 8th grade. And I have to say, we were seeing some phenomenal results with our students that we had done the pilot with. So we were very excited. We were building momentum. We were building our teams, that collective teacher efficacy. We were finally starting to see, which we know has a huge effect on learning, particularly with students that are not on grade level. And so when the pandemic hit, we really had to, when we came back, we had to, we were just lucky to have this resource. I mean, we were very fortunate to go into the pandemic having just adopted this, because I don't know how we would have made it through. We really focused on the conferencing and the goal setting with kids while because we were fully remote for almost the entire year. And we were surrounded by districts that had many more resources that were fully in person. And so it just exacerbated the inequities and gaps of our students. So coming back then, we saw this turnover of staff. Even during the pandemic, teachers were just leaving. They just said, you know what, we want to focus on our families. We don't want to, I can't manage this. Lots of them didn't feel prepared for the technology online. And some of them, quite frankly, were just close enough to retirement. They just said, you know, I'm going to retire. I don't need this. And so we really had to deal with then not only a new resource, but we had to start all over again with teachers that had not been trained, and that many of them were brand new to the profession, who had done their clinicals during the pandemic online. So the emphasis that we really placed on when we came back this year was, let's just start all over again. Let's reboot, go back to the basics. Let's focus on our frameworks, focus on ERLA and ANEEL, so that teachers really understand the taxonomy, so they can become reading teachers and reading experts. And we focused on less. We try to focus on those focus standards, and really just sort of the development of the understanding of our core. And I think that really helped us, because otherwise we couldn't go back to where we were, because even though we had made strides, we started all over again with a majority of we had a huge excess of staff. And so I think we just took it as, we just need to start all over again, year one. And really we're just kind of launching all over again. So we did that launch pre-K through 8th grade, pretty much all over again. And we really need to go back again and do even more training next year. We want to go back to our coaching cycles. I talked to my team about that just recently. We were setting our expectations for the next years. We need to get back to our principal teams being experts with school pace, because we had a lot of turnover there too. So really just going back, I think, to the basics and starting again with that coaching and professional development.
Thank you for that. And let me, I want to get Dr. Toledo in here, but I know a little bit about Central Falls because a few years ago, your district was in the news because the state fired all your teachers and then had to rehire them a couple of weeks later because they had nobody to replace them with, right?
And many of them are still our teachers today.
Exactly. So how are you creatively addressing some of these challenges there in Central Falls?
Yeah, so creatively is probably the operative word. You referenced that firing 10 years ago. So our teachers have scar tissue from that, and then you layer on so much trauma and intensity from the last few years. And so certainly everything that my colleagues have been sharing really resonates about teachers need time to process and restore. But when you pose the question about mental health, I actually started thinking about what we're doing differently for our students. And really what resonated when Dr. Smith said different, not more of the same. So one of the things that we started doing, and we can admit now, should have been doing long before the pandemic, but I think this was a catalyst where you couldn't ignore certain things anymore. So we've been having our students get trauma therapy. We're running process
for the students
groups.
or for the teachers?
For the students. We probably need to do both, if I'm honest. But what we're seeing is once students can lower that affective filter and feel more safe, because this is, you mentioned knowing the community. Central Falls, for those who don't know it, is largely an immigrant community. This is many people's first stop in the US. And so many of our students, in fact, over 800 of our students this year are brand new to the country within a year. And so in addition to trauma from COVID, there's also trauma from immigration. And so we have found that supporting our students holistically is top priority. But what's been beautiful about that is we've also seen they're so much more ready to learn and receive the learning once they feel safe and seen. And so I would just encourage everyone who's starting this ARC journey to really think about how do you ensure your students feel known and safe. And then you add on these great materials and resources and coaching, and it all, has the opportunity to really come together. So the mental health of students has been really a focus point in CF.
Thank you for raising that, because that's, I think, part of the challenge. You got to address the learning needs, but you also have to address those psychological, those mental health challenges that many kids are bringing and that many staff are facing too. Dr. Spells, we haven't heard from you yet. I don't know if you want to jump in on this conversation. And then I'm going to pass the baton to my colleague, Dr. Irvin Scott.
Yes, thank you. I'm an ex-Navy guy, so what we did, we tried an all-hands-on-deck approach. During the pandemic, we really got out into the community. We did we formed what we called a rapid response team, and we went out and supported our families. We delivered food, we delivered hotspots, we talked about ARC with our families. We really went out and had these conversations with our families to try to address some of this learning loss. And then after that, we continued to do mental health checks on our families and students while we were out, and we continued to do that when we came back into the building. Then we tried to maximize all our ESSER funding to kind of close these learning gaps. We did a comprehensive summer school with ARC.
How was the attendance for the summer school?
It was great. It really was, because the first one, the students were glad to get back into the building. So that helped. And we did some double dosing also. Wherever our students were struggling, we gave them an extra dose of whatever they needed, either was math or reading. But we really felt like that we had to get our parents and our community on board with what we were doing. And we were also able to engage our politicians and have them to come on board and worked with us in some of these workshops that we were doing for our families. We're going to use, again, with some of our ESSER money, some of our teachers to do some art workshops with our families, so they'll be able to help our students with their homework and different things that we're doing. So we really believe in that community approach, being a good neighbor, and that if we can use that good neighbor approach, that we can close some of these gaps that we have.
Thank you. Let me turn it over to my colleague and co-facilitator today, Dr. Irvin Scott, to pose some questions to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Pedro. So delighted to be here with everyone. Hopefully you can hear me, not hearing too much in the background, but it is, I just want to echo Pedro's appreciation for you being here, the superintendent, you superintendents for being here. It's one thing to lead at the superintendent level, sort of on an ongoing basis at normal times. It's completely different to lead at that level during these very difficult times. So we just applaud you. We celebrate you. I want to talk a little bit about trust. I want to elevate this concept of trust, especially in the midst of all of the challenges that are going on, whether they be the political challenges, the COVID challenges, even the racial reckoning. And Pedro set that up very nicely. I would love for some of you to just talk about how you have engaged stakeholders, whether they be teachers and moving new curriculum forward, like David talked about, whether they be community members as you had to engage beyond the schools to bring them into to help address the challenges around COVID. How have you worked to build that trust with individual stakeholders? So you could just choose one. You could talk about the building trust with teachers, or building trust with community members, building trust with the board. For example, we know some of the challenges that are happening around board leadership. Who would like to take that question up as we talk about lessons learned around building trust? Go ahead, Stephanie. Thank you.
This is something that I'm very proud of. So wanted to share, because our community had every reason to lack trust in the district after many, many years. So one thing we did was set aside ESSER funds and did participatory budgeting. And the parent group named themselves Voces con Poder, Voices with Power. It is now an ongoing group that has grown, but just as a real simple way, if people still have ESSER 3 funds that are, not totally delineated, I would encourage you to think about, and with future budgets, participatory budgeting. It was such a powerful way to hear from the community, but also build trust, because they saw us immediately respond. Whatever the community voted on, we put the dollars there.
Wonderful. So bringing in the community around these, as you alluded to earlier, these short-term dollars that you're hoping to have long-term effect, and having them help shape how you're going to use that. Thank you.
Exactly.
Go ahead, Christina, Dr. David.
So the way I understand trust, I really believe trust either erodes or is further developed through communication. When there's a lack of communication, that's when there's typically a lack of trust. It's not usually personal. So when all of this started, and we've even continued with this, we took the approach of weekly, what we called coffees. So we would get on Zoom every week, no agenda, and open it up to both staff and parents. And we gave them we were very transparent about how we were making decisions, what decisions we were making, seeking their feedback. And we did this every single week. We had principals did it too in their buildings. They had a 10 a.m. coffee and a 6 p.m. coffee, both in English and Spanish. I did it weekly as well for parents to seek their feedback, heard from their fears, told them where we were going, next steps, was very honest that, I don't know I don't know necessarily how to manage a pandemic, where I'm doing this, making decisions off of CDC. I'm not a medical specialist. I mean, very honest conversations, which really, really helped us. I was very proud to say, while I know I was watching my colleagues have board meetings that were extremely contentious, I never had one of those throughout the pandemic. And I do believe, and that was a part of it, was because we over communicated all of our decisions early and fast. I also think we, we included the voices, of our students. We tried to seek from them, what they were thinking, how things were going. So I really feel like it was the communication piece, and we've continued that. So even after, this is something that we learned, that parents liked the convenience. They liked being able to be a part of our decisions. And from that, we've continued those coffees, but also spun off a citizens advisory council. So we have a council of parents that we started the year off with this year. We said, what do you want to talk about? I'll give you an example. One was curriculum. They wanted to make sure there was transparency. They were hearing all these things that were being taught in school, and that, they were very concerned about what we were teaching. And so we said, okay, let's break that down. So we spent the year topic by topic going through and answering all their questions about how we communicate progress. We would open up and show them our systems. And I think that really proved to build that trust. And those were some of our, and we chose parents that we knew were not necessarily satisfied, and so that they could be a part of that conversation. And then they went out and further were communicating, like, look, this is really what's going on. Our next project that we're working on based on their feedback is we're going to develop course maps for everything pre-K through 8th grade, everything that we teach. We're going to have it on our website, hand it to them. It's transparent. It talks about, what we're teaching with regard to Black history, the contributions of our LGBTQ community. So all those things that they've had concerns about, we're just going to put it out there. And that was all a result of some of those concerns and fears that we opened up the floor to with them. So that was really successful for us, and we'll continue with that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Davis. If I'm hearing you correctly, some of the concerns that they expressed were as a result of what they were hearing through the media and so forth and so on around CRT and LGBTQ. And you use that as an opportunity to bring them closer, if I'm hearing you correctly. That's powerful. And they had ideas around how to shape it going forward. Thank you. Dr. Keyser.
Yeah, thank you. With building trust coming into a new community, we're right in the middle of a pandemic. Similarly, the community didn't have a lot of reason to trust the school district through lots of transitions. So it was really sitting down and having lots of one-on-one conversations. Fortunately, leveraging community partnerships helped to foster that sense of trust. We had our Boys and Girls Club house 70 of our students while we were all remote, just so that there could be some level of support for the families as well as the educators while we were all in a remote setting. But one of the opportunities that showed up through this entire process was empathy interviews. We started to do some empathy interviews with our students, our staff, and our families and community members. And what that has evolved to is that it was a powerful tool that kind of grew tentacles. Now we have pockets of our staff who are coming together, and they're like, can we continue to do this, but just instead of talking about curriculum, talking about just life in general, or supporting one another, or new teachers, or what. And so I said, absolutely, like, say yes to conversations very, very quickly. And so that's been something that has helped. And now how do we take that and leverage that into elevating where are the concerns? And then as we address the concerns, look for those quick wins. And that's how we're starting to redevelop trust. It's a long road, and I wouldn't say that we're out of the woods by any stretch of the imagination. But if we're able to take the waves from 11 foot down to 6 feet, that's progress.
Thank you, Dr. Keyser. Empathy interviews, if you've not heard of them, if you've not used them, look it up. Really powerful tool for having deeper engagement with stakeholders. You can do it at multiple levels. You can do it within the district as well as working with community members. You said one other thing that I wanted to come back. I'll remember it, but really appreciate points that you're making. Go ahead, Dr. Mauricio. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Scott. So when I think about the trust that we had to build and endure and recreate, I'm reminded that trust is a temporary state of being. I always share with people that trust is like a credit score. you have to work years to get that score to be 750, 800. You miss one payment and send it in on day 31, and you will see your Credit Karma graph go down into the 500s. And so, and I think one of the reasons that people decided that maybe this is not for me any longer is that every day we were making decisions on people's lives, and people were entrusting us to keep their children safe. And teachers were entrusting us to keep their them and their families alive. So we had to go beyond just entrusting us to educate their children. We were also entrusted with keeping their children emotionally safe. And so we had so many variables of keeping people in a space where there was a time where Peekskill, our school district in the state of New York, was identified per capita as the highest COVID rates in the state. And there were people, like many districts, people work from outside and they work in, and our teachers are highly committed to our community. But there was a thought that there was a bubble of air that had droplets of COVID in it. And if you entered this space of Peekskill, that that I was putting them in danger by keeping the schools open. And not in statements or in wording, but in the concerns that we heard, and parents thinking that, why are you sending my child to the school? So I think that was weighed on us as superintendents. And I'll just share that pre-pandemic, we had the community had voted to do capital projects in addition to launching our ARC initiative. And one of the capital projects beyond the athletic field that we built a STEAM lab at our high school. But one of the things that we did was we purchased a firehouse that the city was selling. And we purchased it because it was within the walkable community of our families that needed it most. And we renovated that space into a family resource center. And in that space, we provide reading, it's called Raising of Readers, creating literate homes for our parents and teaching them how to create that opportunity. We do all the courses that we all do, with GED and citizenship and financial literacy. But they entrusted us to move forward on that. And so we had to deliver on that promise. And, and I'm proud of my team. And again, as a superintendent, we're the conductors of the orchestra. So I give kudos to Madeline Sanchez and Rebecca Aviles, who are making art happen, and the teachers and administrators. We just get to talk about it. But I also give kudos to the team who led these capital projects, and they saw a firehouse that had been abandoned for some time reinvented into a state-of-the-art space for our families. And so I'll end there, but I would just say that this was a tough year for trust. I think our credit score is doing okay, but we are always focused on maintaining those lines of communication open. So I'll end with that, Dr. Scott.
Thank you so much, Dr.
I was going to say, I love both of those.
That's what I was going to say.
Superintendent as conductor and trust as a credit score that you have to build and that you can't take for granted. So that's a great way to think about this.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Go ahead, Dr. Spells.
Yes, I just wanted to quickly say and echo the same comments of Dr. Davis. We over-communicated in the early days of the pandemic. Every piece of information that I received from the state board or anything that I received from about COVID, I shared it with my staff. And I didn't paraphrase it. I shared the actual documents that I received. And I think we won a lot of points by being transparent with that we weren't hiding anything, because people were scared in the early days. And they knew that I was a doctor of education, but not a medical doctor. So I wanted to make sure that they understood that this wasn't coming from me, so to speak, and this was the information that I was receiving. And I made sure that they got it as soon as possible too. There's a lot of, people had a lot of time on their hands. So if I got it on Saturday, they got it on Saturday. And we reviewed things together. And I also did some weekly weekly check-ins, and I did some videos. And that's how I built trust with staff, and they did the same thing with their families. And it was a good way to build trust and keep everybody on board, because everybody was scared in the early days of the pandemic.
Thank you for that, Dr. Spells. Over communicating and communicating in a timely way, tremendously important. Dr. Keyser, I remember the point that you made a reference about partnering with community outside agencies, which I think is a tremendously important idea to keep in mind as it relates to all of the work that you're doing. Faith-based organizations, community-based organizations. There's no way you can do this work, particularly during this time, by yourself. So trying to figure out how you go beyond the school to continue to support kids and communities is tremendously important. And then the last point, several of you alluded to this, things you started, but you want to continue after the challenges sort of die down, right? After the pandemic, what are things that you actually started during the pandemic that people are saying, you know what, we should keep this up once the things sort of calm down with the pandemic and the other challenges. So I just wanted to highlight that point. Pedro, back to you.
Thank you. I mean, on that point, how many of you are going to continue to maintain some kind of hybrid options for families that want them? You could just raise your hand just so we could see. Nobody. Okay, that's interesting. Because there's a big demand. Some parents still want it. So, but we haven't talked too much about the political polarization and how that might be affecting your district. I'm pretty sure that's an issue in Wisconsin. I don't know about the rest of you, but I'd love to hear how that's playing out, because in many parts of the country, it's become a major distraction that's preventing superintendents from doing the work of addressing the educational issues. Anybody want to comment on that? Okay, there he is.
Oh yeah. I'll speak from the fact that I am in Wisconsin, and yes, we are steeped in having those conversations, and I'll say the community of Beloit is a supportive community. We wrap around our schools, and so I'm very blessed to have the staff and the community that I have here. But in Wisconsin, there is a big divide from the state politicians to the people who are running schools day to day and making sure that we are doing the things right by our students. But it is a constant evolution of conversation and trying to push forward and say, this is what we're talking about, and trying to push against the rhetoric that is trying to make something that isn't there. So when we talk about critical race theory and the historical legal context of where that came from, and then saying that when we are talking about our students, we need to talk about who our students are and allowing for those lived experiences just to exist without qualification, without asking people to justify their lived experiences, so that we can make changes to our organization and to our structures so that all of our students are successful, not just some of our students, but all of our students are successful. That's what I mean. It's a long road. As a good friend and colleague and someone much smarter than me said, it is a long road with infinite possibilities and an infinite journey.
Anyone else just about the politics of the moment? I see Dr. Davis.
So it was an interesting, this is an interesting question, because we got through the pandemic, as I had said, making some life or death decisions, and really felt like we had over communicated and had the trust of the community. I mean, there was fear, but I think we had the trust and came out of it this year. And we're just surprised at the shift from this, seeing districts being inundated with parents who are angry around these decisions and students in mass, not mass, to starting the school year off, surprisingly, with groups of people that were not from our district showing up at our board meetings this year, making these statements around critical race theory and equity and social justice and our curriculum and where we were headed with that, that we were teaching sex to kindergartners, and making these very explosive statements, and people that weren't even from our district in most cases. And it was really surprising. It was almost like, where did this come from? We didn't necessarily see, or my board didn't see that coming. So really what I found I needed to do, and we'd already started this work, was we did our equity training for our board. I said, if these are the people that are going to see these people and have to hear these, I don't want them to start to distrust the decisions that we're making in our district, because they're the ones who are having to, to support policy and support our teachers and what they're teaching. So we had brought Dr. Tyrone Howard out, who is an amazing trainer. He's been with us several times, and I'll tell you right now, he continues to support us. If I call him, if I email him, he's still there. He's worked a lot with our teams, our teachers, and our equity committee. But we are currently in the process of with our board is developing equity policy statement, so we can define what equity is, to define what it means to us in District 33, as well as we're building a data dashboard that is showing our achievement gaps. We want to, how can you argue about equity when the data is in front of you, that our data mirrors the national data of our Black and Hispanic students, that is the 20 to 30 point gaps we're seeing? How can you argue around equity and the work and definitions of what we're doing through MTSS and through our adoption of ARC, when you see those discrepancies, when you see our white students outperforming the state in our district, which we have a very small white population, and in a small, even smaller Black population, but it's growing. But our Black population, our Hispanic population, which is the majority, are 20 to 30 points behind our white students. So we're working to try to put those things out there and say, this is a community crisis, not just a national. This is impacting our community. So putting it out there, I think, is important. But I think that the political piece was just, I don't want to say it was surprising, but how it was almost an organized event, and it was these same people were traveling from district to district and having these same conversations. And no matter what you said to try to explain the work that you were doing and how you defined critical race theory, that we're not teaching it, we are practicing these things so that we are not disproportionately marginalizing students. It just wasn't happening. So we just said we have to do this ourselves for our parents, those that are reasonable and willing to listen, and put it out there.
Yeah, and it's very important to point out that a lot of times the people who've been mobilizing to these board meetings are not parents in the district. They've got a different agenda. So, Dr. Smith.
Yeah, I'm going to say, for me, it's an exciting conversation, although, there's a lot of political motivation associated with it. The fact that the conversation about equity, inequity is a national conversation, to me, is a plus. It's a needed conversation, and across the country, we should all be having that conversation. Like Dr. Davis, we've experienced a little bit of, people asking about critical race theory. Are we teaching it? Our parents ask questions about it. And our response to that is, we don't prescribe to a particular ideology. However, it's really important that we educate our staff about the students that they serve and the community that they serve, and that we also educate our kids that we have something called windows and mirrors, which is where our kids can see themselves in our discussions and in what we teach, but they can also see other races and cultures in the world, and they see those as well as a part of their new learnings. And so for us, that's really an important conversation. I know that there's disagreement on the topic of, race equity, whether it should be happening. But again, it's happening. I think one of the things that worries me most that is getting some attention is the lack of minority teachers of color that are going into the education profession. Now that keeps me awake at night. And, some of that is also about issues of equity in terms of, whether or not Black and Latino kids can afford college, whether they have the same access to colleges and universities, as well as, questions about why are they not yet entering the education profession. And we also have to ask ourselves, when they are in a profession, why are they leaving? And so those are some of the things that I think we need to address. But I'm happy to say that this is the first year. My district, again, is mostly Latino, 80%, 17% African-American, 3% other, 90% free and reduced lunch. And this year, as I sit here in this chair, I'm proud to say that we probably now have 8 to 10 Black teachers in our district that we are hiring this year, only 2 or 3 which were here before. And we probably have about 20 Latino teachers in our district. It is the first time that we're experiencing this, but I'm excited because the research shows that all kids benefit when they have teachers of color. And so for me, it's an exciting conversation. It's exciting to see the changes. I'm open to the disagreement that comes with it, just happy to have it.
I think we're running out of time, but Dr. Toledo, you might get the last word here.
Oh, I hope that's not the case, because someone wiser than me should do that. But I wanted to just give
don't hold back.
A concrete strategy for what Dr. Smith was just talking about. Another way we're using our ESSER funds is because we can support professional learning, we've chosen to invest in a TA to BA pipeline, as we call it. And so many of our teaching assistants do share those identities with our students. And the thing we are always looking for is more teachers who are multilingual. So we're using ESSER funds both to support teaching assistants to become teachers and actually have a whole CF cohort going through together. So we're so excited for those 30 future CF teachers who do share language and racial and community background with our kids. And also we're investing in a principal residency for 5 of our teachers who are all alum to go through. These are current teacher leaders in the district to become principals so that they are the future school leaders. So just thinking again, those short-term dollars for a long-term gain.
That's great. So I'll say a couple words, then may turn over to Dr. Scott to wrap up. I just want to thank you all. As I said at the beginning, it's a tough time to be a superintendent, tough time to be leading change efforts, especially during this period of such intense polarization. There are lots of people hurting right now, and especially kids. And you get to respond, and it's not an easy task. So thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your willingness to serve.
I just want to echo that. Thank you. Beautiful thoughts, ideas, suggestions, very practical, both from the heart and the head, and we just really, really appreciate it. I love poetry, so I got to end with a poem, then I'll turn it over to Amelia. A poem that reminds me a lot of what I've been hearing today, and it's by one of my favorite poets, Langston Hughes. And in the poem, he says, "Bring me your dreams, you dreamers, bring me your heart melodies, that I may wrap them up in a blue cloud cloth away from the too rough fingers of the world." And that is what poetry might do: wrap up your dreams, protect, preserve, and hold them until maybe they come true. Columbus dreamed of finding a new world, he found it. Edison dreamed of light, more light, and he made light. All the progress that human beings have made in this old earth of ours grew out of dreams. That is why it is wise, I should think, to hold fast to dreams. For when dreams die, life is a broken winged bird that cannot fly. Hold fast to dreams, for when dreams go, life is a barren field frozen in snow. And in many ways, that's what you guys are doing. You are leading educators to restore and maintain and realize the dreams that parents and communities have for their kids. And we applaud you for the work that you're doing. It's been a delight to be with you. Thank you also, Pedro.
Thank you, everybody, for attending today, for participating today. We think about you, and as a company, we are trying to do whatever we can to help you create the kinds of schools where all kids are served well and all teachers succeed. I am going to finish with, during this time of such difficulty, I want to recommend the book by Dr. Nogueira and Dr. Rick Hess, A Search for Common Ground, conversations about the toughest questions in the K-12 education. And if you don't have time to read the book, which is really good and I highly recommend, you must at least listen to the podcasts where they continue to have conversations from two people that come from different places, different opinions, but are in search for common ground in order to move forward together. So that's what we want for you. Thank you for everything, and we'll see you next time.